Hi everyone, welcome to VLGA Connect and the penultimate edition of the governance update for the year. Hello Stephen.
Hello Chris, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. And I always like an opportunity to use a word like penultimate. Doesn't come around that often.
Oh, that's all right. As long as we're not discombobulated by it, it will be fine.
Indeed. So what has your week looked like? I know you've been out and about around councils as part of induction. How's it going?
Our road trips and Zoom trips have continued, Chris. So really good to have worked with some really good groups of councillors, but obviously there's an awareness of a few things. One, the burden of induction is certainly there, that there's a lot for councillors to pick up on, including returning councillors, in a short space of time. So we're just in the process of getting into the formal council meetings now. So as a consequence, I presume there's a few councils that are still in the honeymoon period.
What are you finding in terms of councillors' understanding of the newer requirements of the Act? What sort of questions, I guess, are coming up?
Yeah, I think for a start, Chris, there is a reset of the thinking, and a number of returning councillors also have said that there is a challenge to rethink their mode of operation around this notion of a principles-based Act, as opposed to the 89 Act, where for many processes, such as conflict of interest, you could basically go through the steps and arrive at an answer. So that reset around who are we as a group, what do we stand for as a council, how do those principles inform how we make decisions, I think is really exercising some collective minds at the moment, as it should, which is good.
Conflict of interest has been simplified somewhat in the new Act. Are you finding people are finding that easier to understand?
Oh, isn't it a classic case, Chris, that the Act has less words, but in some ways that's added to the complexity. Can I give a shout out for Tony Rownich from Hunt and Hunt Lawyers? We're collaborating with Tony on the delivery of these, and I'm very glad to have a lawyer in the room when councillors are talking about conflict of interest. Yeah. I think as always with conflict of interest, it's around the margins, because it's that classic test of reasonableness, and it's not what the individual concerned would think is reasonable, but what and whether they would be influenced, but what would not your best friend, not your worst enemy, but a reasonable person think of the circumstance. So we've had a number thrown at us in terms of people who have been volunteers for organisation, might do a sausage sizzle monthly. Does that create a conflict of interest? We've had situations where a councillor has been an office bearer of a community organisation up till the last 12 months and got off. Compare and contrast with a councillor who was on the committee of a preschool about 10 years ago, but now no longer knows anyone associated with that preschool. Now, I don't give an answer with any of those, because really everyone is on its merits about the closeness of the relationship, how often there's communication, whether people are casual acquaintances or someone that you would have over for dinner, the magnitude of the issue at hand and how it actually arrived at the council. So there's a range of factors that in each case need to be considered as to whether there's a conflict. I suppose one thing I would say, Chris, is there is a general recognition in the sector about that old adage, though, of if in doubt, get out. So hopefully, at least if conflicts of interest are talked about, there is less exposure.
Also, there was a bit of talk prior to the election about councillors or candidates needing to be, I guess, careful about going too strong on issues that might, it's the old Winky Pop thing, make them look like they've got a really fixed, predetermined view. Has that sort of played out on the other side of the election in any way that you've seen yet?
I think so, Chris. In most councils, there's been some concern by candidates as to whether comments made in the campaign period, including Facebook posts, including liking posts by other people, circulating petitions, things like that, have been sufficient to create an apprehension of bias or a perceived bias in an issue that's coming before the council. And of course, these will tend to be controversial issues, and they will tend to be, like your planning type issues. So There's certainly an impact. I'm aware of more than one new councillor who's basically been winky popped out, if you like, as a consequence of incidents that have occurred or comments made prior to the campaign. And again, we're not lawyers, but certainly there's the other side is that in each case, it needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, and the conduct and actions of a councillor, if it's not settled, while they are a councillor, will count for a lot, is the legal advice that we've received.
So that sort of brings us to the tranche of work that is ahead of councils. We've talked in the past, they've got to do a council plan, make sure they've got a longer-term community vision happening, etc. But a key one in this phase is the code of conduct, isn't it? And understanding the standards of conduct that have now been set down in regulation that they need to have regard to informing that code. Is that a conversation you've heard is starting to happen in earnest?
I think there's become an awareness, Chris, that that is the next piece of work, and that integrating the standards of conduct with the values and agreed behaviours of the councillor group in a way that can form a functional code of conduct that is useful for the councillor group through the 4-year term. I think there's becoming an awareness that that's an important piece of work. And we've certainly started to unpack some of that in the induction workshops that we've done. And I'm a little bit early now, Chris, but can I preempt that next week we're really hopeful of having an important announcement from the VLGA regarding an offering. So any councils that are interested in doing some work in that space, please make contact with the VLGA. Our sense of it is, though, Chris, that a really important element of the code of conduct is that internal resolution phase, that the mayor has some responsibilities around the code of conduct and the councillor group, or the standards of conduct and the councillor group. And if the code of conduct and the agreed behaviours can support the mayor to head issues off early, rather than getting into messy conflict, mediation, arbitration, councillor conduct panels, you've got a better group that makes better decisions, you've got a better workplace, and you'll save the community a fortune. So
that's the ideal, isn't it? Nobody wins when it gets to a conduct panel stage.
Yeah, and the reality is, Chris, that if you look at sort of strategic conflict resolution models, the space that you can't be in is avoidance, because issues don't get any better just by being kicked under the rug. So it is really important that councils and councillors have the tools to effectively resolve conduct issues.
Steve, just quickly, I know you've been combing through the standards of conduct. There's a couple of clauses in there that I know have got you thinking a little bit. What are they?
There was 3 that really caught my eye, Chris, and the first one is really at the start, right at the very start of the standards of conduct around behaviour. Dignity, fairness, objectivity, courtesy, and respect as platforms of conduct, and thinking through all the times where they might be absent potentially triggers a potential brief. But I think more importantly, they're really high and great standards to aim for. We should be dignified, fair, objective, courteous, and respectful. If everyone in the sector can behave like that at all times, then that's a really good start. The other ones, I'm always interested when you read legislation and regulation around, why would they put that in there?
Yeah.
And tucked away in the standards of conduct, diligently uses council processes to become informed.
Diligently uses council processes to become informed. Does that mean read all your materials on a regular basis?
Basically, read the papers. Go to councillor briefings. It's no excuse to say I wasn't at the briefing, particularly for a councillor who might routinely not go to briefings. Couldn't be said to diligently use council processes to become informed. So I think, for me, that's a starting point on any issue, to take and understand the advice received from the CEO or the executive staff in your briefings and reports, and then overlay that with whatever feedback is received from the community to make an informed decision, rather than pay scant regard to the internal information and just drop in comment externally. I'm not saying, I mean, there's a really strong thread through the Local Government Act that community input and consultation is absolutely vital to making the best decisions, but it must be treated on balance. Otherwise, the organisation can become a bit sporadic and really won't stand for much.
And the last one?
I thought it was a really classic one. Chris, is fit to perform the role of a councillor when acting in that capacity or purporting to. And I know you love to say penultimate. I've got a particular fancy for purporting as
Yes.
a word.
Yeah, I do quite like that word as well. So what are they getting at there?
I think what they're saying is that when you are wearing your councillor hat, that you need to behave appropriately. And it's like any workplace. It's if you're at work, you're fit to be at work. It's not okay to have a bad day and then snap at someone or be less than your best self and say, oh, but I wasn't well that day. The Act is saying if you're acting in the role, you are fit to do so. I'm sure it's not also saying that if you're going off and enjoying hospitality at the President's luncheon and you decide to stay for the afternoon and enjoy a bit of hospitality, there's an inference there that you still need to behave in a way that befits the office.
That's really useful. Thank you, Steve. I actually said to a group of councillors I was speaking to earlier this week that you should all read the standards of conduct regulations. Sort of said it half tongue in cheek, but I actually think they should.
And ultimately it doesn't go away. I think we've said before, Chris, everything's okay until it's not. In fact, that's Hemingway's words, not mine. But when it's not okay, you'll know it. And really the standards are the platform on which the code of conduct's built. And it shouldn't be seen as regulation. They're just, it's just good behaviour, good business sense to be our best selves in the role.
Setting the bar that everyone is expected to rise to and exceed. And the Minister is very strongly committed to seeing these standards upheld across the sector. In fact, that gives me an in to plug the fact that we had half an hour with Minister Sean Lean, the Minister for Local Government, on a special newsroom edition of VLGA Connect earlier in the week that I recommended people.
Chris, I thought a couple of cracking interviews that you did this week with Catherine, with the Minister and also with the Deputy Commissioner at IBAC, David Wolfe. Some really important themes around conduct in office, and well done to you and Catherine.
Thank you. Though I enjoyed both of those interviews very much. From the Minister, we got a clear indication of where his focus on the sector is. It's a very positive attitude, but it's also one of expectation that people will understand the standards that are expected and comply. We also learned that the rating review is still coming out this year, which means sometime in the next 3 weeks or so, we should see the outcome of that process. We found out off air that we're pretty close to learning who the new Executive Director of Local Government Victoria might be. So that's apparently in the offing.
Oh, you didn't say imminent, but it is by the sound of things, Chris.
I believe it is imminent, correct. And the David Wolfe interview, again, yes, recommend that. We've stepped through all the findings of that report into the potential misuse of information that is held by local government. I think it should be required reading, actually, that report for councillors and employees. A couple of notes before we finish off, Steve. Yeah, go with your thought.
Oh, no, I was going to say it's been an emerging theme through 2020 around handling of information.
Now, the mailbox segment for this week, we have had some mail. One of our regular viewers or listeners in Helen pointed out that we'd missed something in our budget episode, Steve. So slap on the wrist for not noticing that the government is investing $111 million to unlock Victoria's planning system, speeding up delivery of vital major projects and boosting construction of social and affordable housing. Links to some of the stuff that we spoke about, but absolutely worth noting that
source, and that source is a font of reliable information too, Chris.
Indeed, as I'm sure all of our viewers are, Stephen. And Steve, on a sad note, I think we should note the tragic news this week of the passing of Councillor Andrew Goldman from Moira-Shire in tragic circumstances, and our thoughts, our condolences go out to the Moira-Shire family and the family and friends of that councillor, of course.
We echo that, Chris, yeah.
Thank you, Steve. One more governance update coming from VLGA Connect. I can't wait to see what you've got in store for us next week.
I'll be interested too, Chris. I'll see you then.
Steve Cooper joining us on VLGA Connect. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again soon.